Welcome to It's More Than Grit, the CSIS podcast about the crucial role entrepreneurs play in the global economy. I am Mariana Campero.
And I'm Andrew Schwartz. Join us as we hear stories of both triumphs and setbacks and how economic and policy environments across the globe shape their outcomes.
Let's dive in and learn why being a successful entrepreneur takes more than just grit. In today's episode, I spoke with Andrés Díaz Bedolla, the CEO and co-founder of Yumari, a B2B platform connecting international buyers to manufacturers in Latin America, and the recent winner of the Entrepreneurship World Cup, which was held in Riyadh. We discussed his hunger to open his mind, his ambition to learn from China and Chinese entrepreneurs, what he learned while working for Alibaba, and how that experience made him want to help Latin American manufacturers join and compete in the global supply chains. Andrés, thank you so very much for being in It's More Than Grit. It's truly a pleasure to have you on the show, particularly, as we were saying, because you have so much experience in three areas where, are very controversial right now. So let me start first by saying a little bit of your background, right? Sort of, you grew up in Mexico. How old were you when you decided to move to China to become an entrepreneur?
I was 23 when I made the decision. I am Mexican from Mexico City, born and raised. I studied in very different places. I lived in Ireland when I was little, when I was 12 and 13 years old. I lived in France when I was 17 and 18. Then back in France when I was 21 and 22. And then I left to China when I was 23.
Wow. And your parents were ambassadors, or why did you move around so much?
No, they just didn't like me much. No, they really thought that it was important for us to travel the world and have different perspectives. And so both my brother, my sister, and I, we all kind of lived abroad and studied abroad and try to understand different ways of looking at the world.
Wow, that's really cool. And why China? Why a young 23-year-old Mexican that has lived all over the world decides to move to China when you're 23 years old? Did you speak Chinese, by the way?
I didn't speak a word of Chinese. I wanted to go far. No, I used to work for the government. I used to work in ProMexico. It's an office that doesn't exist anymore, but back then it was an office that promoted international trade, attraction of foreign direct investment, and internationalization of Mexican companies. And
I do remember ProMexico and the good work that they did. Yeah,
the good days of ProMexico. It was great. I mean, there's talk about something similar coming soon to Mexico, and so we're excited about that. But yeah, so I was the bottom of the food chain in ProMexico. I was an intern, and then they hired me in my last semester at university. But I started kind of obsessing about China just because we had a lot of investment come from China. And I remember I was once getting coffees and I heard in a meeting how China had lifted 700 million people out of poverty in 20 years, from 1990 to 2010. And I was just thinking,
pretty amazing.
I got to go check this out. I have to go see how they did it. And so I started just talking around the office. I was asking people. And then my boss once, he called me and he was like, hey, you're very excited. You want to do a lot of things. You got to leave the government. I know you like traveling. You like learning languages. We have a lot of investment coming from China. What do you think about getting a scholarship? You can go into your master's degree in China. And then if you feel like it, you can come back and help us with attraction of foreign direct investment from China.
Cool.
So I was like, it's perfect. I want to go and understand how they did this. And then I go being supported from like my boss and I got a scholarship. Great. And so I said yes. And it was like 6 weeks later, I was in China. It was
wow. And what university?
I went to Fudan University. So I knew I wanted to do a master's in economics because I thought that's what I needed to understand how they had done it. And so I applied and they told me like, what university do you want to go to? I remember like the forum and I was like, Shanghai University, like China International Studies University.
Did you even know where to place them in the map?
I didn't even know where I was going. No, but I Googled the top universities and Fudan University is one of the best universities in the world. And it's the best university in Shanghai and in top two, the best universities, Tsinghua and Fudan in China.
Yeah, wow.
So I went there and then, interesting thing, Mariana, once I was there, I realized my master's degree was in Chinese.
You didn't know that before?
No,
kidding me?
I didn't speak a word of Chinese. I mean, everything was in English, and they knew I didn't speak Chinese. So I don't know how this happened. I was lining up, and everyone was speaking Chinese around me. And this Italian girl turns around and goes, like, you don't speak Chinese? I'm like, I don't, but like, I'm going to learn Chinese, but like, our degree's in English. And she's like, no, we all speak Chinese because the degree's in Chinese. And so I go to the front, and they're like, this Mexican kid that doesn't speak Chinese, he's enrolled for the master's program in economics. And they're like, yeah, no, you can't do this.
Oh my God.
I
Okay.
know.
Wow. That's pretty shocking.
It was.
And so you decided to open a company.
No, so for my first year, I learned Chinese intensive. So they kept my scholarship, but they allowed me to study Chinese. And so I did level A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I in a year.
Oh my God. Are there any other people that have done that before?
I have no idea. To be honest, I don't know. I think I tricked the system because I jumped a bunch of tests and I just did the highest test. And I studied very hard for the highest test because that's what they told me. Like, if you pass level I test, you can go to your master's. And so for a year, I worked as a bartender. I was Barney in kids' parties. And I would study from 7 a.m. From 7 a.m. to 12 p.m. I would study in the university. I would study by myself for like 4 hours in the afternoon. Then I'd go work. And I did that for a year. And second year, I started my master's. And so I took advantage of my scholarship and I finished my master's in a year. And during my second year, I started my first business in Hong Kong and then in continental China.
Okay. Before we move to the second business that you started, what did the first business do?
And I did a bunch of things. I did a lot of manufacturing because that's kind of my background. So I would manufacture watches in China and send them over to Mexico. I did clothes. I did a bunch of things. But then the real company, it was called Beacon Group. And what I did was my university in France, they contacted me. They're like, oh, we saw you're in China. Could you help us? We have an entrepreneurship program that we want to make in China, but like the universities don't answer the phone. I was like, I can organize that for you. And so I organized for my French university it's called LEAP, Leading Entrepreneurs Acceleration Program. And so I made it up and I created the syllabus and I recruited the professors and I convinced the Chinese university to give credit for the program. And and so that idea ended up being a company that grew for 7 years. And we ended up selling that company to the Chinese government.
Oh my God. Okay. Triple somersault and you land in Alibaba, leading their international initiatives or global initiatives?
Global initiatives for Alibaba, yes. So I was giving a conference at the China, Caribbean, Latin American Expo. And I was talking about what we did with the entrepreneurship programs. And we were trying to just connect business and students through education, doing kind of soft diplomacy between China and other countries. And they told me like, hey, we want to talk to you. And it was the officials from the Belt and Road Initiative. So China's Belt and Road Initiative that started with Xi Jinping and this big announcement in Kazakhstan where he announced $1.1 trillion in about 800 infrastructure projects in 90 countries. There's an office within that program called Talent Training Office. And so they wanted me to lead the talent training fund for Latin America. And so that's why they bought my company. But this person that I spoke to, he was also the general secretary of Alibaba. And so it was all intertwined. I had studied Alibaba and I had worked with Alibaba through our programs. We worked a lot with Alibaba while I was in China. And so that's how I came to Mexico leading the fund. And it was amazing. I gave out 250 full scholarships to underprivileged, brilliant students to go do their master's degree in new tech in China. And then the pandemic hit. So this person asked me if I could lead global initiatives for Alibaba while I was in Mexico. And I ended up staying.
All right. So you were working for Alibaba while in Mexico.
Yeah. So I was in Mexico and I was president of the fund, the talent training fund. But then when the pandemic hit, they're like, well, since you're in Mexico already and you can't come back to China.
Got it.
So
you might as well.
It'd be interesting if you could lead global initiatives for us in Mexico. And so that's how I started. Then a year later, they asked me to represent the arrival and growth of Alibaba.com. And for me, it was great because if we go back to the reason why I went to China, to understand how you lift 700 million people out of poverty, my thesis in university was poverty alleviation through the disintermediation of global trade. So Alibaba was very important in my topic of study because I wanted to understand the impact of technology in the diversification of international trade and how that allows for poverty alleviation in developing economies. And so when they offered me Alibaba.com, for me, it was like, this is brilliant. This is everything I've worked for because I can finally work within the largest B2B platform in the world. I can work from this place to now include Latin America in this global marketplace and in global supply chains. And so that's what I thought.
Okay, so what made you leave Alibaba, an incredibly big company where you were learning tons, I assume, and to say, okay, I'm going to start completely, new venture. I'm going to try my luck again to being an entrepreneur. What did you learn from Alibaba that was so crucial for Yumari, which is the company that you founded and that you're leading today?
Yeah, I mean, I learned everything I know about e-commerce from Alibaba, and it was a great learning experience. And to be honest, being within the Alibaba ecosystem, it was kind of like being an entrepreneur. It's a very ever-changing environment. But what I did realize, and I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for this, but Alibaba.com will never work in Latin America. It will never work because the business model is not aligned to fixing the problems that both factories and companies looking for manufacturing have in the region. Alibaba.com's business model is charging the suppliers a membership fee and keyword advertisement, so publicity within the platform.
Okay.
So when you go into Alibaba to search for something, what will come up in the results is the companies that paid the most to be in the results. And so what I always said,
it's like just a search with sort of the highest bidder appears at the top.
Exactly. The highest bidders are the ones that are appearing in the top. And so what I said was, we have far too much information on our buyers to make them have to sort through suppliers to figure out which one's the good one. If you're telling me what you want to manufacture, when you need it by, how many you need, and how much you want to pay for it, why would I show you 2,700 possible suppliers, then have you spend the next 6 months of your life sorting through these suppliers, trying to figure out if they're real or not, if this one's a trading company for this one's have the same photos. And it's super confusing. It's very overwhelming. And it's not a great experience for the buyer, who should be the center of the platform. What we want to do is offer supply chain solutions to the buyers. And so that's why I left. I left because I realized that if we wanted to put the buyers in the center of the platform, and we wanted to take the information that we have on the buyers to offer them the best option, we needed to do it somewhere else. We needed to create a platform that allowed for that to happen. And the second most important thing for me is that I could not keep supporting fragile, fragmented, cross-border international supply chains. I think one of the most important things we should be looking at right now is regional manufacturing hubs, trusting regional manufacturers for the growth of our own region. And so that's the second most important part with Yumari. It's the buyers in the middle, and we connect you to the most relevant regional manufacturers for your manufacturing project, because if that product doesn't have to be made across the other side of the world, it shouldn't.
Let me ask you one question about that. Compared to manufacturers in China or in Asia that are well known for not only sort of the vertical integration, but also the horizontal integration, right? Sort of what are we missing in Latin America? What are you trying to improve with manufacturers in Latin America so that they can actually be part of those global supply chains?
That is, you hit it right in the, like, it's exactly that. Chinese manufacturers are brilliant in the way that they have for years integrated clusters for verticalization of the industry. So they're very fast at quoting, they're very fast at sampling, and they're very fast at actually shipping whatever product, right? And so a Chinese manufacturer will take an average about 4 hours to give you an FOB quotation, which means quotation of your product in China. But it'll take them a day, maybe 2 days, to send you a quotation of the product in your warehouse, wherever you are in the world. Now, Latin America doesn't have that.
That's pretty amazing.
It is amazing. And we have to understand, they've been doing this for 25 years.
Right.
With a lot of support from the government. There's been a lot of support from the government and Alibaba to what we call digitize and professionalize the commercial offer of the factories, which is how now factories in China, how you have F to C, factory to consumer. You have factories that are creating products directly to consumer because they are so digitized.
Yeah, and you remove the middleman and you go directly.
That hasn't happened in Latin America. Latin America is highly fragmented. The amount of intermediaries in every single international transaction is ridiculous, to the point where both the buyer is not getting an attractive quote and the seller is not getting a margin that's attractive enough to actually pursue the project.
Yeah, so we're killing the business, basically.
Everything is going in the intermediation. And so that's why it was so important to me to understand, if we remove this intermediation that's so expensive, both to the buyers and the sellers, then we actually allow for the suppliers to pay better salaries, to invest in research and development, to create products with added value. And guess what? Products with added value, they have better margins. And so you create this virtuous cycle of economic growth and social growth that is so important. And so that's what Yumari is doing.
Are there any sectors in Latin America that are particularly sort of promising that you believe will be competitive?
There are some that I know are competitive. Right now, we're not doing yet in Yumari heavy industries. They're super, super interesting. So precision parts, metal mechanics, of course, semiconductors, and auto parts with aerospace as well. I'm not in heavy industries yet. I began with consumer products, which are also super promising. We're doing apparel and textile. We're doing food and beverage. And the reason why we do it is because it is very evident why it has to be made in Latin America, right? If you ask for a Pima cotton t-shirt, well, Pima cotton comes from Peru.
Right.
If you want compression shapewear, well, that's from Colombia. They're great at doing polyester compression. And if you want avocado oil, well, that should come from Mexico. Or denim, that's Mexico. Mexico's the best at doing denim.
Yeah, so you're first focusing sort of on the things that we already are manufacturing and have a know-how.
Exactly. And something that was very evident for the buyers to say, well, I understand why this would be made closer to home. It makes sense for me to make this closer to home, right? And so we actually measured every single request for quotation we got on the platform, and we graded them in the highest intent that the buyers had. So how desperate were the buyers in North America to relocate supply chains from Asia to Latin America? We measured how competitive our suppliers are and the capacity we had to measure recurrency on future orders. And that was important for the survival of the platform.
Okay, before I ask you about the new political environment we're going to have to deal with, let me just ask you to explain a little bit to the audience Yumari's business model and how do you charge your customers? How has it been as an entrepreneur? How did you raise your first round of capital? Take us a little bit deeper into your own story of Yumari.
Of course, when I left Alibaba, I didn't know anything about the VC world and raising venture capital, but I knew that this was not a bootstrapping game because it is capital intensive. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be a very competitive space, and so you're going to need capital to be able to thrive in this space. And so that's why I started exploring the venture capital world. Yumari is, and this is one of the proudest things we do not charge manufacturers. Manufacturers do not pay commissions. They don't pay monthly or yearly fees, and they
to appear on your platform.
To appear on the results. And they do not pay publicity above all, because the platform...
You learned that lesson from Alibaba.
Exactly. Because we're training an LLM, we're training an AI model, so that when a buyer tells us what they need, when they need it, how many they need, and how much they want to pay for it, Yumari will match them with the most relevant manufacturer in their natural region. And we will take care of everything from factory selection, product development, sampling, manufacturing, quality control, and logistics all the way to their warehouse. So it doesn't matter if you're manufacturing 15 products in 6 different factories in 3 different countries, you only have to talk to Yumari. You go into your Yumari dashboard, you see all your products, and you can follow up on the process of each one of those products until it reaches your warehouse. It allows you to be smarter, faster, more efficient, and avoid all of those supply chain issues that companies have to deal with every single day. And so that's what we do in Yumari.
How do you make your money then?
What we do is we take factory price plus logistics price plus services or added, like if we have to do quality control or whatever, we have our markup. And so we have a gross margin of about 15% in every transaction. And then that's the DDP price. That's the price in warehouse landed price of product that we present to our buyer. So normally our buyers will tell me, so I need 1,000 jackets. I need these jackets in my warehouse in California for $27. So I'll do everything in the back. So the platform will organize everything in the back. I'll come out and I'll tell you, hey, we have an option for 26, 24, and 21. And these are the times of delivery. These are the minimum order quantities. And these are the prices. And so you can select your samples in the platform. You can give feedback and send your products to manufacturing. And we have a transactional business model for now. We will be introducing financial services in Q1 next year. So credit for the buyers and factoring for the sellers,
right,
which I think will be also a big game changer for us.
Have you increased your customer base recently?
Yeah, I mean, we're 1 year old.
I know,
And, but
that's why I don't want to ask you how many customers do you
it's
have.
fine. It's fine. We have 56 North American businesses right now that are handling their whole supply chain through the Yumari platform. And that is we're very proud to say that because about 80 factories that we use to service this 56 businesses in North America, 90% of them had never exported before Yumari. And they've increased their margins. They've been able to diversify their markets. And so we are very happy with what we've accomplished the past year. And we're ready for exponential growth for next year. I don't want to say it was easy. I think our experience in our pre-seed round is not similar to everyone else's, especially in Latin America. We were very lucky to have an oversubscribed pre-seed round. In the beginning, it was horrible, Mariana. I really thought there was a moment where we spoke to the team and we're like, guys, we're not going to raise anymore. We have a couple of tickets and we're going to try to do it with this. But then one day, 3 funds organized a nearshoring summit. And even though none of the 3 of them had invested in us, they invited me to be their keynote speaker. And so I spoke at this conference. And when I went down from stage, we had 8 funds wanted to invest in us. And that was great. So we ended up having an oversubscribed round where we had more funds interested in us than space that we had in our round. We ended up closing a $2 million pre-seed round, which for Latin America is a very, very large pre-seed, pre-revenue, pre-product, pre-anything. It was also a PowerPoint. So we're happy.
How long will that money last you?
So we made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. So we were 5 co-founders back then. We're now 3. And I think right now 3 is a good number for the amount of co-founders that a company has. But we're 5 co-founders and we made decisions based on what VCs tell you. Like, oh, you're a VC-backed company. You got to spend now, right? But we didn't have a product. We didn't have product market fit. We ended up creating 7 products before the one we're actually using right now. And so we had a crazy burn for the first months. And this is something like when you say, what can someone learn?
Yeah. Those mistakes at the beginning.
Don't make the mistake of thinking that just because you raised capital, you have money to burn. I actually hate the term burn. Like, what's your burn?
Right.
We're not burning money, and you shouldn't be burning money. Every single dime that you have in your company, you should know exactly what is being put for and how that dime is bringing 10 back. Because I didn't come from the VC world, I made the mistake of having a very, very high burn in the beginning. And so that reduced our runway.
Right.
But then we fixed the problem. We extended our runway to about 25 months. And then we started selling. Right now, we have a clear path towards profitability, which I also believe should always be your North Star.
When do you think you'll break that back?
There's one project, Mariana, that if I close it this month, I would be profitable.
All right.
But again, I would invest in a bigger team. We have a bottleneck in tech. And so we would go right back to not profitability and just reaching the next stage in terms of our revenue. But yeah, we're close. We have some customers in the pipeline and in the data, because product development takes a while. So when you have a company, we don't make any money during the product development stage, right? Because we're a transactional business model. So we only start making money once they place an order. So
completely
everything that happens before, so sampling and product development and all of that, we don't make any money for that. And so that's why we have to take them to actually finding the right one so they can make an order. And we have a couple of clients right now in the platform that if they reach an order, which they should, we should reach profitability. So Q1 next year is our goal.
Wow. I certainly hope so. In fact, you recently won the 2024 Entrepreneurship World Cup Award. Tell us about that. I mean, wow, you are 1-year company and you won this incredible global award that put you basically in the map of everybody.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. Why do you think you were chosen? How was that experience?
I mean, it was great. Again, you're in your head, you're working, you have your phase down and you're trying to just lead your team towards bigger revenue and profitability. But I participated in a competition in Mexico first. We won the Mexico competition, but that was November last year. And so I'd forgotten all about it. They told me like, oh, you might go to a global competition, but I didn't even know when that was going to happen. So they suddenly told us like, oh, we're down to the top 250. And so they made us get into this like online program, and we took a couple of sessions. And then
Where was the ceremony? In Dubai?
Riyadh, yeah, in Saudi Arabia.
Riyadh.
In Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, yeah. So the top 250, we did an online program. Then they selected the top 100. And yeah, Moonshot, which is the fund of Saudi Arabia, flew all 100 companies from 81 countries in the world were represented. And
Wow.
the 100 companies, we flew to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and it was 5 days of competition. It was pitching, 3 minutes Q&A. And first I made it to the top 14. And last day was a Saturday. We all pitched. And yeah, we won first place. It was exciting.
Wow. Who was second place?
Okay, so there's two prizes, early stage and growth. So we won early
Right.
stage, and then the person who won growth is an amazing company from Saudi. They won growth. It's a system for auto mechanics to standardize auto repair.
Mm.
They reached $10 million in revenue in their first year and a half.
Wow.
Now they have $100 million in revenue. And this is a 28-year-old kid, and he's brilliant. I loved him.
Brilliant.
Yeah, and then in our category, second place was AI agents from Armenia.
Okay.
It was amazing.
What an incredible experience, right?
It was great. It was great. I really think
Yeah. All the people you met and all the ideas and
I'm still talking to so many of them because we're creating
Yeah.
so many synergies between our companies. There were a lot of medical devices, which I thought were brilliant. A lot of people that I would have invested my own money if I had any into their companies.
I'm sure.
No, it was a really, really great experience. And I think for us, I worked really hard because if we're only talking about the Mexico-US border, well, this is not a global competition company. But the fact is, we don't just want to fix the cross-border trade in the Americas. If we create a platform that uses AI to match businesses with the most relevant regional manufacturer, well, if you're in Spain, it might match you with a manufacturer in Morocco. And if you're
Right.
in Riyadh, it might match you with a manufacturer in Jordan.
That is exactly what I wanted to ask you. Are you really just focused on US-Mexico border, or your dream or your market is the whole world?
100%. I think we're lucky enough that we were born in the highest transactional border in the world, which is the Mexico-US border.
$3 million per second.
It's crazy. And I
Yeah.
always say, like, when people ask me, who's your competition? There's enough space for 100 unicorns working
Yeah.
in the US-Mexico border, solving supply chain and cross-border manufacturing. So I feel like we are looking at cross-border contract manufacturing from a different light, and this can be replicated anywhere in the world.
Yeah. Okay. Now we have to go into North America, right? How many times have we heard the word nearshoring? How many times in Mexico our government has said that we're going to be the greatest beneficiaries of nearshoring? So before I ask you about President Trump and his recent focus more on homeshoring than nearshoring or friendshoring, what are the numbers? How much money has it moved to Mexico and Latin America in terms of investments to really justify this craze about nearshoring?
You know, Mariana, that actually we had a worse year than last year in terms of attraction of foreign direct investment.
I know.
It was 7% lower. I do think it is misunderstood. I think the word has been thrown around very lightly, and I don't think people really understand what it is or what it could be. When we talk about the possibility for X growth in the revenue of the trade between Mexico and US, and I think we have to go back and think about the times when we were not talking about nearshoring and the world was talking about offshoring.
Yeah.
And the world was talking about offshoring because the companies were talking about efficiency. They were talking about reducing the cost of
Correct.
manufacturing. They were talking about the cost of raw goods, the raw materials, the cost of labor. And so that's when everyone started moving to China. And China was very smart.
It was all about efficiency
All about
and
efficiency.
cost.
Exactly. All about efficiency and cost efficiency and paying the
Yeah.
least amount of possible. But The highest winner of that trend was China. Now,
Correct.
China was very smart. China created the joint venture and technology transfer policy. Now, any company that wanted to take advantage of this craze of offshoring would have to come into China.
They had to leave something behind, something very important indeed.
51% partnership with a Chinese company.
Yeah.
They had to do talent training. They had to do technology transfer. And they had to integrate local manufacturers into their supply chain. This last one is the one that interests me the most. That is not happening in North America. That is not happening in Mexico. That is not happening anywhere else that we've thought that we're bringing investment. Bringing investment that is empty into a country, that doesn't leave anything behind, doesn't generate any value.
Correct.
And so, yes, if we...
Which was the model of the maquiladoras in the border, right?
I mean, China copied the maquiladora model in the 90s and then...
At the very beginning, yeah.
Exactly. But now when we're talking about Chinese businesses setting up shop in Mexico, I'm saying Chinese, I could be saying European or...
Right, because they're Chinese, they're American, they're European, they're...
Exactly. Any company that sets up shop in Mexico to take advantage of low wages, of low regulation, of corruption, taking advantage of corruption, low wages, low intermediation, to use Mexico and...
I hate the term taking advantage of corruption, but I know what you mean, right?
Exactly. Taking advantage of the situation and of USMCA to bring their products into North America, that is terrible. And that doesn't bring value to any other countries that take part in the USMCA.
Correct.
And so I think the rhetoric should be regional integration and should be technology transfer. We should be talking about that. And that's not a conversation that's being had right now. And that's what's worrying.
Yeah. Let me ask you one more question, Andres, because the Mexican government has said that we should, as Mexicans, try to substitute a lot of the Chinese imports into our own manufacturing. How realistic is that from your perspective? You've been working with manufacturers and we import a lot of pieces from China because they need it for the final product. How realistic or how much will it take for the Mexican manufacturing capability to really be able to substitute a lot of this?
I don't think we will. Integrating a regional manufacturing hub in North America doesn't mean fighting with China. There are things that China does well, and there's things that we need from China. And this is very simple. Last year, when the US said, we're not buying semiconductors from China, and then China turned around and said, oh, that sounds great. Hey, quick thing, starting from August 1st, I'm going to stop selling you gallium and germanium. And just so you know, you need gallium and germanium to make your semiconductors. And oh, by the way, we in China produce 80% of the gallium and 60% of the germanium of the world. And so 3 state secretaries had to fly to China to apologize and ask them to keep sending rare earths.
Yeah.
And China produces 80% of the rare earths of the world. Now, the same thing in Mexico.
Unless we have a plan to substitute
but that will take 3 to 5 years at least to start competing. And so in Mexico, it's the same thing. Mexico is the largest exporter of TVs, for example, flat screen TVs. We don't make the panel. It will take us at least 1 presidential term to have factories ready to make the panel that makes TVs.
Yeah. And in the meantime, we're going to have to keep importing from China.
Exactly.
If we want to keep selling television.
And cars.
Americans want to keep buying
Exactly. And televisions and cars and clothes. We don't make polyester in Mexico. Polyester is imported from China. And so we need to import polyester to make activewear. All of the activewear that's sold right now, the rise of Lululemon and Worry and Built and all of these D2C brands, Alo Yoga, that are huge now. Worry just became the 10th largest brand in the world. These brands use polyester, and I'm sorry, but Mexico doesn't make polyester. So we need to import that in order to make finished products. It's a game of complementarity more than fighting.
Yeah, and maybe picking what is in the national security arena and what is not.
Exactly. I think that's super important, understanding that there are things that it's not worth it to fight for, and there are things that are important. And I think, for example, in the semiconductor, which is a national security issue because you need semiconductors for drones and for a lot of things.
Yeah, for your military.
For the military, exactly. There is a strategy, and then there's the CHIPS and Science Act, but it needs to be regional. The U.S. doesn't have the capacity to create the 5 massive manufacturing facilities that it's trying to create in the next few years. And this needs to be a project where Mexico needs to be involved in terms of talent, in terms of space, in terms of raw materials, in terms of manufacturing. And so I think it's just smart to think of us as a region. And this is the way that everyone else has done it. Europe has done it, and China did it with the Asian tigers. They rose Vietnam and Cambodia in order to create a stronger region. And this is what we should be thinking of.
Yeah. Andres, we're coming to the end of our episode. Let me just close by asking you the question that we ask from all the entrepreneurs we have in this podcast. If you had a few words of advice for another young entrepreneur who wants to start a business, what sort of lessons have you learned? What mistakes did you make?
So many.
What would be that word of advice? If a kid comes to you and says, hey, Andres, I want to start my company, what would be sort of the first thing to look at?
Stop thinking about it. Stop waiting for the idea to be perfect. And go out and make $1 out of the idea. Just have someone pay you to fix a problem. Fixate on the problem, not on the idea that you have the solution is. As I told you, our problem has been the same since we thought of Yumari. The problem has been the same since I left for China when I was 23 years old. The solution has changed 1,000 times. The way that we're going to make this happen will keep on changing and evolving. So don't wait for this to be perfect so you can launch it, because then there's going to be 10 other people that already did it. So just get out and have someone, convince someone to pay you money to fix that problem for them.
Yeah, not your father.
Not your dad. Not your dad. Not your dad. Someone else.
Well, thank you so very much. This has been an incredible conversation. I truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Mariana.
And you certainly are one entrepreneur that has a lot of grit. So it's a great pleasure to have you on the show.
It's important to have grit, Mariana. Thank you so much for inviting me. It was a really great conversation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.